Today we're doing kind of a special
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So everyone watching, first of all, hi, and thanks for being on this call. I'm excited, about learning more about childcare collectives. But for those who don't know, in New York City right now, the governor and the mayor are really pushing for a reopening of the schools. They say it's safe. It's not a full reopen. They're going with what sounds like a blended learning model, right? So schools will be cut down to like half capacity or third capacity, and students will attend in cohorts. Like maybe you're the Monday Wednesday crew, and somebody else is your friend is in the Thursday Friday crew, whatever. And it's the logic is that the testing rate is pretty low, and they set a trigger to fully shut down again, which is 3%, right? So if we're doing the constant test, and 3%. citywide, the infection rate goes back up to 3%, they'll shut down the schools again, which is pretty low. And a lot will feel like it's not quite safe. We still don't have nurses in every school, or they're saying there's going to be hand sanitizer in every room when we can really have soap in the bathroom sometimes, or state-of-the-art filtration systems when schools were struggling to get working air conditioners to begin with. And even some of the concerns I have is that right now schools are being held to a double standard that other places are not being held to, where we're saying it's okay for hundreds of people to congregate in schools, but not, for sports events, for the arts, for really anywhere else. And it's really unfortunate. And my biggest worry is that we will open up in September, and things, rates will spike and go a little bit higher, and then we'll hit 3% and have everything shut down again by October, November, which would be really unfortunate.
Yeah, and I want us to talk a little bit too about how class plays into this and how race is playing into this, and just the intersection of our lives are playing into this, because this decision is not impacting all of us equally, and the pressures are very different, from one community to another. And so I think the first thing that I want to say here is that for any parents or guardians or caretakers that are tuning in, this is a judgment-free zone. All of us are in impossible positions right now. Parents are in an impossible position. Teachers feel like they're in an impossible position. School workers feel like we're in an impossible position. So, whether it comes to reopening schools or keeping schools closed, I think it's really important that we acknowledge why this is such a fraught decision to begin with. And I think, taking a step back, the reason why there's so much pressure, one of the main reasons why there's so much pressure to reopen schools physically, is because parents and families have not gotten the economic support that they need. They have not gotten recurring stimulus payments. The $600 in unemployment assistance has expired. And while there are negotiations ongoing to kick them up again, at the end of the day, that's not helping people's problems this week, last week, right now. And so parents, right at the cusp of reopening schools, are in an economically impossible situation. And I just want to name that. I want to acknowledge it. And I don't want to, and I don't want anyone to feel guilty about what we're talking about. But at the end of the day, it just does not seem safe to reopen schools right now. We just had statements come out from several organizations, teaching organizations and so on, saying that we aren't ready. And the other thing that I think is really important for us to really realize is that we're talking about 3% infection rate citywide. But what happens if your community skyrockets to a 5% COVID infection rate or a 10% COVID infection rate, but the rest of the city stays low? And that's the overall type of reopening plan. It just doesn't seem like there is enough detail and enough effort put in to a reopening plan where teachers feel safe, or frankly, where parents feel safe sending their children. And while on one hand, people are saying, oh, kids can't get COVID, it's fine, or kids, it doesn't really impact them, it's fine. We are a beautiful, vibrant, diverse city with multi-generational households where kids live with their grandparents. I was raised, with my parents and my grandmother growing up. I lived with my grandmother growing up. My mother, full disclosure, my mother is a school secretary, not here in New York City, but in Florida. And I'm scared. I'm just scared to death about reopening schools when Florida has an even higher kind of infection rate and lack of containment than New York has. And so there's class that plays into this. And so often these decisions and policy decisions are often made with whether a narrow band of affluent people are benefited by the decision, without consideration for so many people whose lives may be at risk. And so, Jabari, I don't know if you want to kind of speak to the class element of this as well.
I mean, it's really true. I mean, what you were just talking about with like what happens if your community spikes. I mean, here in Brooklyn, we have a neighborhood called, it's for those notes, Sunset Park. It's a predominantly working class Latinx community, and just came out like today or really recently. They spiked up to like over 6% in that area, whereas the citywide is still around 1%. And as of now, those kids are set to go to school in a few weeks, even with rates spiking in that part of the city, which is really it's really scary. And what would be nice to see would be greater effort to make sure that students and families are equipped to deal with virtual learning, because people may be opting to send their kid back because they feel like it's a lost cause, trying to deal with the tablet they were supposed to get from the city that they may not have gotten, or they got the tablet but their internet's not working and they're deeply concerned about their child getting an education. And we are really seeing about this digital divide being exacerbated in the midst of all this crisis, with some people being easily able to have access to every tablet for every single one of their kids, and perfect internet connection where everyone can be on it at the same time. And they're hiring a tutor to help out with everything else. And you have other families that are just, and I honestly, I hear the difference in the background too. When students come off mute to like share an answer, I can hear the difference in the households where it's really noisy, and the parents are trying to work too, and you can hear like younger brother is also in class right now, and it's just really noisy, and everyone is like on top of each other. And yeah, it also is just hard with like not enough effort to reach out to the students who have been like the most left behind. When everything shut down in March, there were some students who I know who did not get on board. I did not see them in terms on the Zoom calls or in via email or anything. And the phone numbers we have for their parents were not working. And I for all intents and purposes, I don't know what those students have been up to since March. And it really seems like we need a much more dedicated effort to get everyone on the same page and everyone supported, especially working class families that don't quite have to have the access to check in or be supported their child's education.
Yeah, and I think for folks at home who are just tuning in, a lot of people may not have known or realized that you yourself are an educator, and you know exactly what's going on. And you're also pointing out, that there is no perfect scenario here, because staying home obviously and clearly is not the ideal educational format for us as well. We know this. If getting a better education at home was possible on a mass scale than public schools, then we'd be talking about doing that more permanently. But the fact of the matter is that we are in a very difficult situation. This is a crisis. But at the same time, I do think that there's something to be said where, listen, this is the difference between something being a political talking point in campaign time and actually walking the walk. And when campaign season rolls around, I feel like it's very normal and very classic for politicians to kind of wave around and say, teachers don't get recognized enough, teachers don't get paid enough, teachers aren't given the resources that they need to succeed and to help and to help invest in our children and our future. But now that we're out of campaign time and now that we're out of election season, some of those same people will go around and support a budget that cuts our schooling in order to add more to policing, for example, or making reopening decisions that are guided not by the public health and not guided to preserve and save the lives of teachers, children, families, and school workers, but allow these decisions to be guided by a for-profit and economic incentive. And this is what we're talking about when we say having a society that puts people before profit. I know that everybody wants to go back to work. We all want to go back to work. But first of all, are you wearing your mask correctly? Are you a nose peeker or not? Because if you're letting your nose peek out, you're not helping us get back to reopening. But also, are we making the investments in public goods? It's important to realize and reiterate that all of this was preventable. Where we're at right now, we didn't have control over COVID cases coming to the United States, but this situation that we're in right now, mass unemployment, schools staying closed, runaway infection rates with no hope of contact tracing when they get really high in certain communities, all of that was preventable.
Yeah.
And we could have had a situation where we reopened schools, or at least started to gradually reopen responsibly, and where we could actually have a plan in set right now. We don't have that. That was preventable. But this is the situation that we are in due to poor decision-making on the federal, state, and local levels. And so what we're really going to do now is okay, we know what the problem is. Let's figure out one solution that you can apply directly in your life. And that is, if you do decide that you want to opt either in blended learning or in remote learning, where your child is going to be home for some larger period of time than they normally would be, how can you work with your neighbors, with other parents that you trust, in order to maybe do a Robin type of situation with childcare, so that you can get some time off and someone else can kind of take the ball that day and take turns in order to organize safely a childcare collective. So Jabari, do you have any parting thoughts on kind of what this means in terms of organizing, and just even how this has political implications as well?
Yeah, no, I just think this is going to be very important moving forward, just because, it's like you said, the support is running out, the unemployment checks are not coming, and the people that are going to be harmed by that predominantly are, people that already didn't have the means, like working class, Black and brown people and people of color, who will need to, make up for the fact that we have a presidential administration and, a Republican, Senate that do not want to keep extending these unemployment benefits. Even just with, the choice of parents to, continue remote learning, about a third of parents in New York City have chosen to do, virtual school. And I'm sure if you saw racial breakdown, you would see that it was probably, largely white, more affluent people that are able to do that, which is really unfortunate. This organizing is critically important, because right now we are filling a gap left by, the administration.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Jabari. I'm so excited for you to go in and rock Albany. Make sure we raise hell around those bad budgets, and make sure that we really fight for a more progressive New York for the many.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks so much. All right, so let's get to the main kind of event. What I know a lot of you all are here for is to actually learn these skills. How to organize a childcare collective that can help give yourself a break, that can help give a loved one a break. This is just such an enormously important skill, and I'm glad that we are having an incredible organizer right here from our team, Jonathan Soto, who is our one and only Throgs Neck field lead and political organizer. We're so excited to have Jonathan with us. Thank you for joining us, Jonathan. For folks who don't know, Jonathan is speaking from true experience. He is a father of a young daughter out in Throgs Neck, and childcare, I am sure, is not a foreign topic to you at all, or your wife or your family. So, we're so excited to have you. Thank you for joining us today, Jonathan. And let's get right to it. How can we, first of all, what is a childcare collective? What is it used for? And how do we set one up? Take it away.
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Congresswoman, and also for creating this space at this really critical time. As a public school parent here in Throgs Neck, Stephanie, my wife, and I have had to deal with the realities of the challenge of childcare during a pandemic. As budget cuts start taking away curricular programs, it's been very interesting to be in this kind of pressure cooker of seeing all these bureaucratic kind of stepping stones for parents, especially working class parents. Especially in my school, many of my neighbors are definitely essential workers that cannot afford the alternatives that are emerging right now. I seen many private tutoring companies commodifying tutoring, many people not having access to the enrichment programs or the summer youth programs that were cut, which you spoke about a couple of months ago on the attacks on the budget that are occurring. So this is particularly painful for many parents. We see our children, my daughter, 9 years old, is not socializing as often as she should, especially during this crucial time in her development. There's this separation that many children have from their peers. So it doesn't look like there's going to be a very clear destination. But I think that we can determine a direction, especially as things become more chaotic. So really excited to dig deep on the practical content for today. It's good to frame this. Many parents felt trapped by the two options that they're presented, either blended learning or in that case, entirely remote. And it's really two really difficult choices. We don't want our intergenerational family members in the home, especially our abuelas and abuelos that may be infected with COVID. If a child is restless and is not putting on a mask, so the options that we have really require us to work together. It doesn't look like a lot of the solutions are very clear. So we need to continue thinking about our relationships and how we're going to connect with one another while also advocating for policies. This is in no way, shape, or form a substitute for public funding of education, but it's put us as parents in a situation where we need to organize. So what is the issue that we're dealing with? And the problem is that we're all juggling with childcare and school reopening. And you may not know exactly what back to school looks like for you, but we know right now it's going to be partially remote or entirely online if you live in New York City. So what we're trying to present today is this idea that has been emerging, which people have called it learning pods or mutual aid childcare. It comes in many names, but really it's about a horizontal relationship from parent to parent to work together to not only meet their neighbors' needs, but at the same time, understanding that our survival is dependent on one another. When budgets get cut, when after school programs fail, it's critically important for us as parents to look and work in solidarity with one another. And really want to emphasize that today we're going to talk about a concept called time bank. So this time bank concept is really not about providing charity, but solidarity. And solidarity requires relationships and trust. We don't think that any person is better or worse than another person because what they need and what we can provide. This is really about leaning on one another during this turbulent time to identify what resources we can provide and what resources we can receive from the community. And we have to work together to make these decisions collectively. So we're about to kick off the slides, but I'm going to be providing a reminder. So there's this 3-step cycle where you'll be able to find each other, make a plan, and try it out. So you being here is part of the first step, which is finding each other. And we're going to have a pledge form that we're going to pitch several times throughout this presentation. If you sign that pledge form, we'll make sure to connect you not only to volunteers if you live in the district that could provide some type of volunteer tutoring, but at the same time, it'll allow us to connect you to other folks that may be interested in setting up this time bank collective childcare situation. Then for make a plan, we want to make a plan not based on our priorities, but based on what your priorities look like. So we will provide toolkits with different forms that you could use to figure out how to best coordinate your childcare pod or your childcare network. And we'll make sure to provide the support that's needed and make a plan. And lastly, try it out. It always requires taking the first step, understanding that your situation within your school or within your neighborhood may be different from another. But once you try it out, then you start with the first part of the cycle, which is make a plan. So we'll emphasize that. But as we move on to the first slide, I really want to shout out DSA Red Sprouts. So DSA Red Sprouts is an amazing childcare collective, making organizing more accessible to parents and caregivers. And for all their help, we want to thank them. They provided many of the materials for this workshop. They really believe in supporting working class parents. So we are in a debt of gratitude to DSA Red Sprouts. You can connect with them on Twitter at Red Sprouts NYC, and you can find them on their website at redsprouts.wordpress.com. So thank you again, DSA Red Sprouts, for your solidarity. So let's jump into the meat of the presentation. What is a time bank? So a time bank is basically a pod, a word you've probably heard several times as parents recently, or a network of people giving and receiving care. For every hour you give of care, and that care could be many things. It could be virtual tutoring. It could be recreation in a public space with safety COVID guidelines, or it could be in-person childcare. So if you decide to enter into this time bank and you give an hour of care, you'll receive an hour in return. So this is not charity, this is mutual aid. It's parents understanding the need to rely on one another in order to provide the services that are no longer accessible, either because enrichment programs have ended, or as many of my colleagues and my fellow parents, people that have lost their jobs that are currently unemployed, they don't have access to the private tutoring industry, which excludes lots of working parents because it is the privatization of education. We want to create this space, the Congresswoman wants to create this space so that we could participate in this time bank, and we'll definitely outline what that process looks like. But the general idea is that 1 hour you give in terms of volunteer service or a activity, you or your child receives that 1 hour in return. And how is this different from swapping childcare with one friend? Well, in a time bank, you can give and receive from different people. And the time bank will make sure that the hours are accounted for. So as opposed to having a two-person pod or network where you're limited in different types of skills that a parent or a tutor could provide, by expanding a pod or a network to 5 or 10 people, you'll be able then to have a different set of skills which could benefit the families that may want different options for their child. So that is what a concept of the time bank is. And we are now thinking about, once you are able to move forward with the time bank, it's very important to know that all hours are equal. So 1 hour of tutoring equals 1 hour of in-person childcare equals 1 hour of outdoor recreational activity or 1 hour of translation support. So the hour is the hour. So let's talk about, what does a time bank look like practically? So here's the scenario. Let's say that Angela tutors her child of one of her friends, Pablo, in chemistry. Pablo is playing soccer with his niece, whose mother, Liliana, is doing arts and crafts with Angela's child. What we see here is a time bank is different from just one person to one person providing service. It is a community of people, a community of relationships that are maintained. And you get to share in different types of care, support, and allows you to build a collective of relationships instead of a one-to-one relationship. So being that this is mutual aid, it allows for more sustainable engagement. Oftentimes we have a kind of hierarchy or top-down way of doing volunteerism, which this is not that. This is really about identifying the resources or skills that may exist within your pod. And at the same time, the campaign is committed to connecting parents through different access, different volunteer services if you live in New York 14. So we are going to remind everyone of the pledge right now. So you're gonna put your hand over your heart, as we see there in the graphic. But this is part of the first step about finding each other. So if you take this pledge now, whether you are outside of the district and want to do a childcare in your or childcare pod or collective in your specific neighborhood, or in New York 14, and we'll be able to provide that support. This pledge is how we're going to find you. So if you plan on organizing a childcare tutoring pod, please sign this form. And I'm going to spell this out. It is bit.ly / pledge to care. Again, where you could take the pledge, type in bit.ly / pledge to care, which is spelled PLEDGETOCARE. Really encourage you all to please sign up. And for parents or members of our community that are in District 14, please pledge, and we'll make sure to get you trained, whether it's on Zoom or any of the Google Sheets or any of the database outreach needs, materials, supplies. We're able to engage with you if you take this pledge. So we are definitely encouraging everyone that can create a childcare collective in their community to take the pledge. And if you're in District 14, we'll make sure to reach out and provide the support that you need. So let's say you are taking the first step with us, which is let's find each other and take the pledge. We make the plan, and as we begin the plan, we talk about outreach. How am I going to find people in my neighborhood, people in my community that want to join together to help out with childcare, whether tutoring, recreational activity, childcare in person, or virtual tutoring? So what we recommend is first identify your parent community. Who do you know? Who do you trust? We know that we have lots of friends, whether we meet them at the PTA or it's a parent coordinator, or if it's a neighbor that you take the bus with together in the school. Feel free to connect with folks that you already know. Have you connected with a parent where you went and dropped off your children at school and alternated a ride towards school? Or were there ways that you had informal tutoring groups or even after school programs that you participated in that ended? We really recommend that you reach out to folks in your community, especially if you're interested in engaging with them in this time bank, in this childcare collective. So you talk to your closest parents and ask them to bring another trusted person. And these networks or these pods should start pretty small, 5 to 10. You want to make sure that there's trust in the network and the group, but at the same time to be inclusive. Make sure that we reach out to our neighbors. We've seen that the unfortunate privatizing of tutoring, many affluent communities and parents are leaving public schools, taking tutoring, and it's a self-selecting group. And we know the difficult race and class dynamics that take place when we're not inclusive. So please make every attempt to be as inclusive as possible when reaching out to your neighbors so that we could assist with outreach and help growing the specific pod or network that you're creating. So with next, let's say you've already reached out and you want to go and start the kickoff meeting. So once you've done your outreach and received your crew of folks, what you want to do is cover what the agenda looks like for your first meeting with your pod. So we'll have a sample agenda that you could download and print off for your first meeting. We have an amazing toolkit that the amazing team members at Team AOC put together for you all. So you could download and print out the entire toolkit. So the way that the kickoff agenda looks like, we'll review that right now, but just want to direct you right now to please view this toolkit at ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. Again, you can download and print out the toolkit at the following website, ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. And you'll be able to receive the entire toolkit, and we'll briefly go over what the kickoff agenda would look like for the first meeting. So remember, you signed the pledge form today. I pledged to create a childcare cooperative in my neighborhood. You reached out to parents that you either know from your school or from your neighborhood. And now you are meeting for the first meeting of the collective, which could happen through Zoom. And we're happy to train you on how we could facilitate that if you're in the district. So a pre-meeting, you could create, let's say, and send over a podcast or do a reading on mutual aid or childcare organizing. This is important if you'd like to have a concept or share some discussion and get to know folks better by having common material. That way, that can inform the conversation that you're having on how the group that you're creating is not just a one-off charity, volunteer gathering, but it is about mutual aid and finding ways to support one another throughout the entire school year. So then you'd like to do introductions. You want to get to know each other and break the ice with a common group facilitation question that's related to this scenario. So for example, what has been the most challenging part about COVID and raising children in this time for you? I would say is the inability to go outside has been really, really difficult for my family and I. And I'm sure that question, when you're with the group of folks that you're having conversation with, you'll see a lot of commonalities and you'll be able to build solidarity as you move forward. So what you'll also like to do is define what is a time bank. So we've reviewed what a time bank is. It's a place to get and make a record of who gives 1 hour, who receives that 1 hour, and how do you distribute that amongst the group for childcare, virtual tutoring, outdoor recreational activities, and other services that you may determine within your group. So you want to make sure that you also go over the group agreements, roles, and communication purposes. So we want to make sure that everyone's desires, everyone's preferences, everyone's expectations are clearly accounted for. You want to discuss roles and communication purposes by determining who may be a coordinator. So the role of the coordinator alternates. So let's say you'd like to have a coordinator that prepares the first meeting or the first two meetings. It could rotate. That way there's responsibility that is distributed throughout the group. So this coordinator will rotate. This coordinator could check in with members of the group, the pod, or the network, make sure that people are receiving what they're contributing, and making sure that all hours in the time bank are allotted for and are actually executed. Also, this person will be coordinating for the first couple of weeks, and then you could then have a training program of how the coordinator has any feedback on best ways to continue the group, and record that and make sure that the parents talk about ways that we could work together to address some communication issues that may arise. And you'll like to talk about whether you want to do a WhatsApp chat or a group text or a Google shared drive, which is something we're happy to set up for you if you'd like any training on any of these items. Then you'd like to fill out intake forms together. So these forms should cover very basic information like contact, emergency information, medical information for children, and what each parent can give and receive to the collective. So we have sample intake forms that you could download and print in your toolkit. And once again, you can find all of these different items at ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. Again, you could download and print out the toolkit with all these sample guides. Again, these guides are guides and are not fast rules. You could feel to shift and change the language as you'd like. However, this is here to guide you throughout this process as you receive the information. So as we then move on to the next slide, we will review, and this is the sample agenda. So this is just what it looks like when you go into the toolkit. You'll see, for example, we have reading suggestions, podcast suggestions, and different ways you could facilitate the meeting. So again, you could download and print this at ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. Now to the intake forms. These forms, again, a bit more comprehensive in the website, but this is what you'll see, which you can note the name, phone number, email address, and different ways that people would like to either contribute or receive different services. People can, for example, suggest in-person childcare, arts and crafts, sports, tutoring. Obviously, every activity that happens in person should follow social distancing guidelines, and we have some COVID tips that you can review in the toolkit as well. So again, you could view all of this information at ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. So some basic COVID-19 safety tips. And let me just take a second there to refresh. And COVID-19 safety tips. Obviously, you'd like to encourage children and adults there to wash hands, wear masks, stay remote or safely distance outdoors where possible, and set very clear expectations for communications. This is a very difficult time we are living through. Many people feel very anxious about what is happening and the new norms that we're navigating as a society, but it's very important to be very clear on COVID safety tips, especially if folks are deciding to do in-person childcare, and understanding that as a community, we need to take care of each other, protect each other, and allow for the time bank to continue nurturing itself. It's very important to be very clear about how do we minimize risk for children. And we can go on to the next slide, which we have a couple of more basic safety tips. If you are having indoor childcare, make sure that you walk the entire space of the house, the apartment, the room at the child's height. Check for knives, sharp edges, small objects, anything that may be a choking hazard. Cover up radiators and outlets, and have no open flames or hot beverages if you are engaging in in-person childcare. Never allow kids to share food. Many children have allergies and have different food sensitivities, and maybe a parent may not note it, which is very important in the intake forms to note all the allergies that a child may have. That way, we could reduce the possibility of children uh, receiving a allergic reaction. And if there's something that goes wrong, please, please, please let the parent know right away. It's encouraged that there's a group chat, a common space where you can communicate with parents if something were to go wrong. And if for whatever reason the life's child is in danger, 911 is the option. However, we just want to be very careful that anytime we engage police, the likelihood of conflict may arise. So just be very aware that police interactions may present different levels of risk for families depending on immigration status, race, and gender. So you want to be very mindful of that. Additionally, other childcare tips. We want to create a space that allows for kids to choose what they want to do in their own space. So something that's been helpful with different childcare collectives is creating different corners. That way, children are in their own socially distant space. Notice the energy, check in with children consistently, and keep everyone participating in whatever the activity may be. If this is something, if you're doing indoor childcare, a lot of the different care or the tutoring may also happen virtually. So those are scenarios present for less need to think about the social distancing measures. However, if you're doing in person, it's very important to be very aware of what's happening with different children. We move on to additional childcare tips for social justice caregiving. Please respect kids' consent. Ask before you hug, pick up, or otherwise touch a child. Ask questions about their preferences, especially if they want to go to the bathroom or they're feeling tired. Feel free to check in and respect the preferences of those children. And do not normalize one kid touching another kid when they don't want to be touched. And to respect and honor kids' pronouns. And if you do not know the child's pronouns or the teen's pronouns, ask if you don't know. And we looking at the COVID-19 safety and childcare tips. Here is a screenshot of what the document looks like. Again, you could download and print the toolkit and all the documents that we've reviewed at ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. Again, ocasio-cortez.com/childcare. You'll find all the different documents that we've shared with you all today. And as we are approaching the conclusion of the workshop, we want to emphasize once again that we really want to have parents connect with one another, especially during this time. We are seeing that our education budgets are becoming more and more attacked, where they want to cut resources that many parents in public schools cannot afford otherwise. We've seen the ending of summer youth programs, enrichment programs, and we really need to rely on one another. We want to thank the Congresswoman for advocating from the beginning of the pandemic about how these childcare and education cuts would affect us. It's important to demand that our public dollars are funding our public education. This presentation is not to supplement advocacy. And it's unfortunate that we don't have the resources that we need, but we need to engage with one another. So we are asking you to please take this pledge that if you plan on organizing a childcare tutoring pod, please sign this pledge so we could have your contact information and we'll reach out to support you. You can sign up for the pledge at bit.ly/ Pledge to Care, which is spelled PLEDGETOCCARE. Again, bit.ly/pledge to care. It's critically important to not only emphasize the need for us to meet each other and find each other, which is the first step, then for us to make a plan collectively with parents that you've been able to outreach in your neighborhood to make sure that the guides that we've provided for you are not set in stone, that you need to create a plan with your neighbors that works for you, and to commit to testing this out, to following through on the pledge and ensuring that we're able to not only connect with our neighbors during this really challenging time, but also to let us know if you're in New York 14, if there's a need for additional types of volunteer services or different topic areas where we could ask members of our community that are willing to volunteer their time for this time bank. It's critically important that you take that pledge, that we sign up and make sure that we have each another's back. Again, very simple step, finding each other, which is something that we've done today. Sign up for that pledge, and then when you do outreach, you'll make a plan with your neighbors. And once you make a plan, you test it out. If you are in New York 14, we are happy to not only train you in the use of Zoom technology, in setting up the Google Sheets, in setting up a database, in providing resources or materials for outreach for you and your neighbors. That's something that we are committed to doing. And again, please take the pledge by visiting bit.ly/pledge to care. So we want to thank you all, especially parents, as someone and as my wife, myself, my family have time and time again felt the deep uncertainty, the lack of clarity, and feeling trapped by these two options, which is entirely online or blended. There needs to be a third way. And I want to thank one of our parent leaders, Angela Torres, who has been emphasizing this in Throg's Neck time and time again, that there needs to be a third option for parents to find one another. And we're deeply grateful to the Congresswoman for focusing on this issue, for providing this space for parents to organize and to really work with one another to find the resources that we need. So again, please sign up for the pledge at bit.ly/pledge to care. bit.ly/pledge to care. So thank you, especially to Red Sprouts for their help. Their materials are so honors the diversity of the families and the type of care that we should focus on providing to us and our neighbors. So we want to thank DSA Red Sprouts for all their assistance. You could check them out at redsprouts.wordpress.com, or you can find them on Twitter at Red Sprouts NYC. And want to thank Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. We want to thank soon-to-be State Senator Jabari Brisport, and especially you, working families, working parents that took time out of your day, that was very busy, that was very chaotic, that has lots of uncertainty during this really challenging time during COVID. And we just want to thank you for joining us. Please, one more time, pledge, sign up at bit.ly/pledge to care. Thank you, everyone. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your evening.